Hello, just got back from Chicago yesterday, actually early this morning. Went to a record store called Bucket O' Blood, and as you can tell, they're really into horror and other things kind of related to that genre. Pretty awesome indeed. First one that I got was a split, and it is Massgrave and Jakobsa. Don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but as you can see, the release underneath it is a 7-inch, so this is very tiny, about half the size, maybe about a 4-inch record. And I don't know if you can kind of tell, but based on the reflection here, you can see that each side has about the same number of tracks. It's 2 tracks, about that much on there, plays at 33 RPM. Doesn't last very long, but when it's hardcore punk, it's kind of how it's supposed to be. Interesting release, but then I went to the front desk and asked the guy working there, told him that I like to go to record stores, that I wasn't from around there, and asked what local music he would recommend to me. He asked what I was into, told him metal and some jazz, and basically anything that just sounds really, really interesting and out there. He thought for a little bit, then tried to look, couldn't remember the name of the band, but then found it, and it is Professor Hugh G. Rection and Friends. It's called The Jungle 1958. It's not actually old. It's from 2016, so it's a very new release. Not even on Discogs yet, but it's this really interesting story about a professor named Hugh G. Rection who went over to I believe into the heart of the African jungle and had to befriend these tribespeople before he was killed. He eventually was killed, but he learned how to basically speak their language within, I think, 6 hours or something. Ridiculous is what it said in there. But the tapes were rescued in a Chicago apartment. Again, this sounds like it's just fiction, and I'm pretty sure it is. I don't think there's a Professor Hugh G. Rection. But basically, it's really interesting music that is a blend of almost like 1950s rock with some tribal kind of fake type of African music, and yet done pretty recently. So it's just a really interesting, strange blend. I don't even know how to recommend it or how to describe it. The album itself is really cool. Very, very gold, as you can kind of tell in there. The next one was actually a used copy of the reissue by Grimes, Halifaxa. Haven't listened to this yet. Really got into Grimes' last album, Art Angels, so I figured since the price was right, it was very cheap, and basically took a gamble on this, so hopefully can listen to this later and give it my full attention. Then, as I was browsing around, the guy at the record store counter again, he kind of pauses and says, actually, there's a release that you might like. It's called Brain Tentacles. It's a local band to Chicago, but this is kind of a major-ish label. It's called Relapse Records, and he goes, it's not super local, like not super small, but they are still local to the area, and it blends jazz with metal very nicely. And I've only listened to one track so far, but from what I can tell, it's definitely more of the metal sound with layers of saxophone and other jazz kind of feels on top of it. So it's really interesting and really cool so far. The other piece that's really nice is the color of the vinyl itself. It's a very cool, like maroonish, deep, plum, reddish type of look. Very similar to the weird octopus monster that is apparently eating a ship on the cover. So it has that going for it, which is nice. Then there is this other Brain Tentacles release, and I got this because it was only $5 and because it was on a local label. And the interesting thing about this label is that it's on Dark Matter Coffee. They kind of put out this release. It's a split release between Brain Tentacles and Wild Jesus and Devil's Lettuce. But you might notice Dark Matter Coffee. That name kind of sounds familiar if you have watched the series on Netflix called Easy, which takes place in Chicago. I would recommend it, especially episode 2. I'm very partial to that one, but Dark Matter does kind of pop up in, I believe, 2 of the episodes. There's only 8, so give it a watch as well. Then, I'll go through quickly the used records that I found. Billy Joel, The Stranger, I mean, you can't get much more classic than that. Has a song about me moving out, Anthony's song. Then there's always Just the Way You Are, Only the Good Die Young, and She's Always a Woman. It's classic. And finally, we have The Cars, and this is Heartbeat City. I'm always fond of The Cars, and for a used cheap record, I needed this. And it has You Might Think, as well as Magic and Drive. I mean, it's not a perfect album, not like their eponymous album that they released back in 1979, I believe. The self-titled The Cars. That's just pop rock at its best, but still, when they're on, I mean, The Cars can write a darn catchy song. So that's what I got from Bucket of Blood. I would recommend it. Overall, I'd say probably a strong 4 out of 5 stars. The only thing that it had lacking was it's very small, so there's not going to be a ton of selection, but for what it is, for just kind of a neighborhood record store, it's pretty awesome. You can always also get some books there and other, like it says, other horror and speculative fiction and fantasy products. They had some games and buttons and movies, so if you're looking for something scary or just something to put on TV or on your turntable, I'd say check out Bucket of Blood.